Sarah Martinez stood at the shooting range counter, her hands trembling slightly as she filled out the paperwork. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. She had never held a gun before, let alone fired one, but here she was at 28 years old, finally, taking the step her late father had always encouraged her to take. "First time?" asked the gruff range officer, a man in his 50s with calloused hands and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His name tag read Officer Thompson. Sarah nodded, unable to find her voice. The weight of the past 6 months pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Ever since the break-in at her apartment, she had been living in constant fear. The police had done what they could, but the perpetrator was never caught. Her neighbors had suggested she get a security system, but Sarah knew she needed something more immediate, something that would give her confidence when walking to her car at night or being alone in her home. "Don't worry," Officer Thompson said gently, noticing her nervousness. "Everyone starts somewhere. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've seen people who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn become excellent marksmen with proper training and patience." The range was busy that Saturday afternoon. Sarah glanced around at the other shooters, most of the men who handled their weapons with practiced ease. She felt completely out of place in her simple jeans and sneakers, carrying the rental case containing a basic pistol that Officer Thompson had recommended for beginners. As they walked toward the shooting lanes, Sarah's mind wandered to her father. Miguel Martinez had been a police officer for 25 years before a heart attack took him when Sarah was just 16. He had always talked about teaching her to shoot, about the importance of being able to protect herself, but somehow life had always gotten in the way. First it was high school, then college, then her demanding job as a graphic designer. Now, 12 years after his death, she was finally honoring his wish. "Lane 7 is yours," Officer Thompson announced, setting down a box of ammunition and safety equipment. "Now, before we even think about loading this weapon, we're going to go over the fundamentals." For the next hour, Sarah learned about gun safety, proper stance, and breathing techniques. Officer Thompson was patient, explaining each concept multiple times and demonstrating the correct form. Other shooters occasionally glanced over, some offering encouraging nods, others seeming less interested in the novice taking up space at the range. "The most important thing," Officer Thompson emphasized, "is to never point the weapon at anything you don't intend to destroy. Even when you think it's unloaded, even when you're just practicing your grip. Respect the weapon, and it will serve you well." Sarah absorbed every word, her initial nervousness slowly giving way to focused concentration. She practiced her stance over and over, feet shoulder-width apart, slight lean forward, both hands gripping the unloaded pistol. Officer Thompson adjusted her grip several times, showing her how to align the sights properly. "Sight alignment is crucial," he explained. "You want the front sight centered in the rear sight notch, with equal amounts of light on both sides. The top of the front sight should be level with the top of the rear sight." When they finally loaded the weapon with a single round, Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the range could hear it. The target was set at just 7 yards, much closer than the standard 25 yards that experienced shooters used. It was a simple paper target with concentric circles, the bullseye about the size of a quarter. "Remember everything we practiced," Officer Thompson said, standing slightly behind her. "Breathe in, exhale halfway, hold your breath, and squeeze the trigger slowly and steadily. Don't jerk it, just apply consistent pressure until the weapon fires." Sarah raised the pistol, her arms feeling much heavier than they had during the practice sessions. She tried to line up the sights as Officer Thompson had shown her, but her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The bullseye seemed impossibly small through the sights, wavering back and forth as she struggled to maintain her aim. She took a deep breath, exhaled halfway as instructed, and began to squeeze the trigger. The anticipation of the recoil made her tense up, and she unconsciously closed her eyes just as the gun fired. The sound was much louder than she had expected, even through the hearing protection. The recoil sent the pistol jumping upward, nearly slipping from her grip. When she opened her eyes and looked downrange, there was no new hole in her target. She had completely missed a target just 21 feet away. A burst of laughter erupted from the lane next to her. 3 men in their 30s had been watching her first shot, and they made no effort to hide their amusement. "Did you see that?" one of them said loudly enough for half the range to hear. "She missed the entire target from 7 yards. My 8-year-old nephew shoots better than that. Maybe she should try darts instead. Another one chimed in, causing more laughter from their group. Sarah's face burned with embarrassment. She felt the weight of every eye in the range on her, judging her failure. The confidence she had been building over the past hour evaporated instantly, replaced by the familiar feeling of inadequacy that had plagued her since the break-in. "Ignore them," Officer Thompson said quietly, moving closer to Sarah. "Everyone misses their first shot. I've seen police recruits miss the target on their first day. It means nothing except that you're human." But the damage was done. Sarah could feel tears forming in her eyes, and she desperately wanted to pack up and leave. The men continued their commentary, discussing her stance and technique as if she weren't standing right there. "The thing is," one of them said to his friends, "women just don't have a natural ability for this kind of thing. It's not their fault, it's just biology." Officer Thompson's jaw tightened, and Sarah could see him fighting the urge to say something. Instead, he focused on his student. "Sarah," he said firmly, "look at me, not at them. You're here for you, not for their entertainment. Let's try again, but this time, keep your eyes open and follow through with your stance." Sarah nodded, wiping away a tear before it could fall. She reloaded the weapon with Officer Thompson's help and took her position again. This time, she was even more nervous, knowing that her critics were watching and waiting for another failure. She raised the pistol again, tried to control her breathing, and lined up the sights. But her hands were shaking worse now, and her concentration was shattered by the awareness of being watched and judged. When she pulled the trigger this time, she jerked it hard to the right, and the bullet struck the concrete wall several feet to the right of her target. The laughter was immediate and louder this time. "She's getting worse," one of the men exclaimed. "At this rate, she'll be shooting backwards soon." Sarah lowered the weapon, her hands trembling with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She had never felt so incompetent, so utterly out of her element. Part of her wanted to storm over to the men and tell them exactly what she thought of their commentary, but a larger part just wanted to disappear. "That's enough," Officer Thompson said, his voice carrying across the range as he addressed the men in the next lane. "This is a place of learning, not a comedy show. If you can't conduct yourselves respectfully, you can find somewhere else to shoot." The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting to be called out by the range officer. "Hey, we're just having a little fun," one of them said defensively. "No harm meant. The lady is learning, just like you did once," Officer Thompson replied firmly. "Show some courtesy, or I'll ask you to leave." The men grumbled, but turned back to their own targets, though Sarah could still hear occasional snickers. The rest of the range had gone quiet, and she was aware that everyone was either watching the confrontation or pretending not to while stealing glances in her direction. "Let's take a break," Officer Thompson suggested, leading Sarah away from the firing line to a small seating area. "Sometimes the first session can be overwhelming. There's a lot to process." Sarah sat down heavily, pulling off her hearing protection and safety glasses. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this," she said quietly. "Maybe those guys are right." Officer Thompson sat across from her, his expression serious but kind. "Sarah, in my 30 years here, I've taught thousands of people to shoot. Some pick it up quickly, others take more time. But the only people who truly fail are the ones who give up." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I knew your father." Sarah looked up in surprise. "You did?" "Miguel and I went through the police academy together. He was my partner for 3 years when we were both starting out. He talked about you constantly, showed everyone pictures, worried about whether he was being a good father while working so many hours." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes again, but this time they weren't from embarrassment. He never mentioned knowing anyone at this range. He came here sometimes to practice, to stay sharp. He always said that someday he was going to bring his daughter here, teach her to protect herself. He was proud of you, Sarah, proud of your art, your independence, your strength. But he worried about you being safe in the world. Officer Thompson leaned forward slightly. He would want you to learn this, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to handle the responsibility. Those men over there, they're just insecure about their own abilities. Don't let their ignorance rob you of something your father believed you could do. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked back toward the firing line. The men were still shooting, their earlier amusement forgotten as they focused on their own targets. She thought about her father, about all the times he had told her she could do anything she set her mind to, about how he had always encouraged her to push through when things got difficult. "Can we try again?" she asked. Officer Thompson smiled. Absolutely. But this time, we're going to slow things down even more. We're going to practice dry, firing first, get you completely comfortable with the trigger pull before we add live ammunition back into the equation. They returned to the firing line, and Officer Thompson spent another 30 minutes having Sarah practice with an unloaded weapon. He had her focus solely on her trigger control, squeezing slowly and smoothly while maintaining her sight alignment. Without the anticipation of recoil and noise, Sarah found it much easier to concentrate on the fundamentals. The key, Officer Thompson explained, is to surprise yourself when the gun fires. If you're anticipating it, you'll flinch or jerk the trigger. The shot should break clean and smooth, like a surprise. When they loaded a single round again, Sarah felt more prepared. She had been practicing the same motion for 30 minutes, and her muscle memory was starting to develop. She raised the pistol, found her sight alignment, controlled her breathing, and began the slow, steady squeeze of the trigger. This time, when the gun fired, she was ready for it. The recoil was manageable, and she maintained her sight picture long enough to see the small hole appear in the outer ring of her target. "There!" Officer Thompson exclaimed. "That's a hit. You're on paper, and that's all that matters for now." Sarah felt a surge of pride that was completely disproportionate to hitting a target at 7 yards, but she didn't care. She had done it. The men in the next lane had noticed too, but their expressions had shifted from amusement to something approaching respect. "Not bad," one of them grudgingly admitted. "Better than my first shot." For the rest of the session, Sarah continued to improve gradually. Not every shot hit the target, and none of them found the bullseye, but she was learning to control the weapon and beginning to understand the fundamentals that Officer Thompson had been teaching her. As the afternoon wound down and other shooters began to pack up their equipment, Sarah found herself feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: confidence. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. She had faced her fear, endured public embarrassment, and persevered. Most importantly, she had taken the first step in honoring her father's memory and his desire to see her able to protect herself. "Same time next week?" Officer Thompson asked as they cleaned up. Sarah nodded firmly. "Definitely." "And Officer Thompson, thank you for everything. Your father would be proud," he said simply. "And Sarah, don't worry about those guys. In a few months, you'll be out shooting them." As Sarah drove home that evening, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. She still had a long way to go, still had so much to learn, but she had made a start. The fear that had been her constant companion since the break-in was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelming. She had taken control, taken action, and that made all the difference. She didn't know it then, but this first session at the range would prove to be more important than she could possibly imagine. The skills she was beginning to learn, the confidence she was starting to build, and the determination she was developing would all be tested in ways she couldn't foresee. The laughter of the men who had mocked her first attempts would seem insignificant compared to the silence that would follow when her training was put to its ultimate test. 6 weeks had passed since Sarah's first humiliating experience at the shooting range, and the transformation was remarkable. What had started as a weekly obligation born from fear had evolved into something approaching passion. Every Saturday morning, she would arrive at the range 30 minutes before it opened, sitting in her car and reviewing the notes she had taken from the previous week session with Officer Thompson. The men who had mocked her initial attempts now nodded respectfully when she took her position at lane 7. Her targets, which once remained pristine save for the occasional lucky hit, now showed consistent groupings within the scoring rings. More importantly, the confidence she had lost in the months following her apartment break-in was slowly returning, shot by shot. "Your grip has improved tremendously," Officer Thompson observed as Sarah loaded fresh ammunition into her magazine. "You're keeping consistent pressure with your support hand, and your trigger finger placement is textbook perfect now." Sarah smiled, adjusting her protective glasses and ear protection. The range no longer felt foreign and intimidating. The sharp crack of gunfire had become familiar background noise, and she had learned to distinguish between different calibers by sound alone. The smell of gunpowder no longer made her wrinkle her nose, and she could field strip and clean her rental pistol almost as quickly as Officer Thompson could. "I've been practicing at home," she admitted, drawing the unloaded weapon and demonstrating her dry fire routine. 20 minutes every night, just like you taught me. Grip, stance, sight alignment, trigger control. Officer Thompson watched her practice with the satisfaction of a teacher seeing his student truly understand the material. Sarah's stance had evolved from the shaky, uncertain posture of a complete beginner to the solid, balanced platform of someone who understood the fundamentals. Her grip was firm, but not death-tight, her finger placement precise, her sight alignment consistent. "Your father would be amazed," he said quietly. "Miguel was a good shot, but it took him months to develop the fundamentals you've mastered in just over a month." The mention of her father still brought a mixture of sadness and motivation. Sarah had started carrying a small photo of Miguel in her range bag, and she often looked at it before beginning her practice sessions. In the picture, he was young, probably not much older than Sarah was now, wearing his police uniform and smiling broadly at the camera. She imagined him watching her progress, offering the quiet encouragement he had always provided during her childhood. Today's session began like all the others, with a review of safety procedures and a discussion of what they would be working on. Officer Thompson had gradually increased the difficulty of Sarah's training, moving her target back to 15 yards and introducing more challenging shooting positions. "Today we're going to work on shooting from cover," Officer Thompson announced, leading Sarah to a section of the range she had never used before. Most offensive shooting situations don't involve standing upright in a perfect stance. You need to learn to adapt to different positions and circumstances. The training area had various barriers and obstacles designed to simulate real-world scenarios. There were mock doorways, car hoods, and barrier walls of different heights. Sarah had watched more experienced shooters use this area, but she had never imagined she would be skilled enough to train there herself. "The key principle," Officer Thompson explained, "is to use cover effectively while maintaining good shooting fundamentals. You want to expose as little of your body as possible while still being able to engage your target accurately." They started with basic positions, shooting around the edge of a wall, over a low barrier, and from behind a mock car door. Sarah was surprised to discover that her accuracy remained consistent even from these awkward positions. The countless hours of dry fire practice had ingrained the fundamentals so deeply that she could maintain good form even when adapting to new circumstances. "Excellent," Officer Thompson praised as Sarah consistently hit the center mass of her target from behind a barrier. "You're not rushing your shots, you're taking time to establish a good sight picture, and you're following through on each trigger pull." As Sarah's confidence grew, so did the complexity of the exercises. Officer Thompson introduced movement, having her advance from cover to cover while engaging targets. He taught her about the importance of getting behind solid cover rather than just concealment, explaining the difference between materials that would stop bullets and those that would only hide her from view. In a real defensive situation, he explained, you want to put something substantial between you and the threat. A car door might hide you, but it won't stop a bullet. The engine block will stop most handgun rounds, but the passenger compartment won't. The lessons were sobering reminders that these weren't just abstract skills they were practicing. Sarah had started taking the training more seriously as her competence grew, understanding that the techniques Officer Thompson was teaching her might someday be the difference between life and death. During a break between exercises, Sarah noticed a commotion near the main entrance of the range. A group of teenagers had arrived with an adult supervisor, apparently for some kind of organized training session. Sarah recognized the adult as Detective Lisa Rodriguez from the local police department, someone she had met during the investigation of her break-in. "Sarah," Detective Rodriguez called out, walking over with a surprised smile. "I didn't expect to see you here. How are you doing?" "Much better," Sarah replied honestly. "Officer Thompson has been teaching me to shoot. I figured it was time I learned to protect myself." Detective Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Smart choice. Tom Thompson is one of the best instructors in the county. If you're learning from him, you're getting top-quality training." Sarah glanced at the teenagers, who were being fitted with safety equipment and receiving what appeared to be their first lesson in firearm safety. "What brings you here with them?" "Community Outreach Program," Detective Rodriguez explained. "These are kids from the community center, all of them interested in law enforcement careers. We bring them here once a month to learn about firearm safety and responsibility. It's part of our youth mentoring program." Officer Thompson joined the conversation, greeting Detective Rodriguez warmly. "Lisa, good to see you. How's the mentoring program going?" "Really well. These kids are dedicated, and they're learning that law enforcement is about much more than just carrying a gun. Today's lesson is about responsibility and decision-making under pressure." Sarah watched the teenagers as they absorbed their safety briefing with serious expressions. She remembered being their age, listening to her father talk about the weight of responsibility that came with carrying a weapon in his line of duty. He had always emphasized that the goal was never to use the weapon, but to be prepared if circumstances left no other choice. Sarah's become quite the marksman, Officer Thompson told Detective Rodriguez. She's progressed faster than almost any student I've trained. Natural ability combined with dedicated practice. Detective Rodriguez looked impressed. That's fantastic. You know, we're always looking for civilian volunteers for our community safety programs. People like you, who understand the importance of training and responsibility, make excellent advocates for proper firearm education. The idea intrigued Sarah. She had never considered that her growing skills might have applications beyond personal protection. The thought of helping others learn what she had learned, of sharing the confidence and empowerment she had gained, was appealing. I'd like to hear more about that, Sarah said. But I think I need a lot more training first. There's always more to learn, Officer Thompson agreed. But you've mastered the fundamentals faster than most people ever do. Your groupings are consistently in the scoring rings. You handle the weapons safely and confidently, and you've shown you can adapt to different shooting positions. Detective Rodriguez excused herself to check on her young charges, but not before giving Sarah her card and encouraging her to call about volunteer opportunities. As Sarah and Officer Thompson returned to their training, she felt a new sense of purpose developing alongside her growing competence. The remainder of the session focused on low-light shooting scenarios. Officer Thompson had Sarah practice with a small flashlight, learning to coordinate the beam with her sight alignment while maintaining proper shooting stance. It was challenging work that required new levels of coordination, but Sarah found herself adapting quickly to the additional complexity. The key is not to become dependent on perfect lighting, Officer Thompson explained as Sarah practiced engaging targets in the dim training bay. Most defensive encounters happen in less than ideal conditions. You need to be able to shoot accurately whether it's broad daylight or the middle of the night. Sarah's accuracy suffered initially with the addition of the flashlight, but by the end of the session, she was hitting center mass consistently even in the reduced lighting. The progression from complete novice to competent marksman was remarkable, and she felt a pride in her achievement that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. As they cleaned up their equipment, Officer Thompson made an observation that surprised Sarah. You know, you've developed into one of the most naturally gifted students I've ever taught. Your hand-eye coordination is exceptional, but more importantly, you have the mental discipline that separates good shooters from great ones. Sarah looked at him skeptically. I still remember missing that first target completely. Those guys laughed at me for a reason. Those guys laughed because they were insecure about their own abilities, Officer Thompson replied firmly. Anyone can get lucky and hit a target a few times. What you've done is master the fundamentals so thoroughly that your accuracy is consistent and predictable. That's real skill. As Sarah drove home that afternoon, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just 6 weeks. The paralyzing fear that had consumed her after the break-in was still present, but it no longer controlled her daily decisions. She walked to her car at night with confidence rather than terror. She slept better, knowing that she had the skills and training to protect herself if necessary. More than that, she had discovered a talent she never knew she possessed, and a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since her father's death. The idea of volunteering with Detective Rodriguez's community programs excited her, and she found herself imagining ways she might help others overcome their own fears and develop their own confidence. The teenage version of herself would never have believed that she would find empowerment and purpose at a shooting range, but life had a way of surprising people. Every shot she fired was a step away from victim mentality and towards self-reliance. Every target she hit was a small victory over the fear that had nearly paralyzed her. Sarah didn't know it yet, but her growing skills and confidence would soon be tested in ways that would validate every hour she had spent training. The transformation from frightened victim to capable defender was nearly complete, and the real test of her training was closer than she could imagine. The community she was becoming part of at the range, the mentoring opportunities that were opening up, and the skills she was developing would all prove crucial in the days to come. For now, though, she was simply a student who had found her calling, a daughter honoring her father's memory, and a woman reclaiming her confidence one shot at a time. 3 months after her first disastrous attempts at the shooting range, Sarah Martinez had become a familiar fixture at the facility. Her Saturday sessions with Officer Thompson had expanded to include Tuesday evening practice, and she had purchased her own pistol, a decision that marked a significant milestone in her journey from fearful novice to confident markswoman. The purchase hadn't been taken lightly. Sarah had spent weeks researching different firearms, comparing features, and testing various models under Officer Thompson's guidance. In the end, she had chosen a compact pistol that balanced accuracy with concealability, a decision that reflected her growing understanding of defensive shooting principles. The best gun is the one you'll actually carry, Officer Thompson had advised during her selection process. A large, powerful handgun does you no good if it's too uncomfortable to carry regularly or too difficult to shoot accurately under stress. Sarah's chosen pistol fit her hands perfectly, and she had invested in professional instruction on its proper care and maintenance. She could now disassemble and clean the weapon blindfolded, a skill that Officer Thompson insisted was as important as marksmanship itself. A malfunctioning weapon is worse than no weapon at all, he had explained during one of their maintenance sessions. You need to understand your firearm so thoroughly that you can diagnose and fix problems even under extreme stress. The technical aspects of shooting had become second nature to Sarah. She could calculate bullet drop at various distances, adjust for wind conditions, and modify her grip and stance based on different shooting scenarios. More importantly, she had developed the mental discipline that separated recreational shooters from those who might need to use their skills in life-threatening situations. Today's training session was different from their usual routine. Officer Thompson had arranged for Sarah to participate in a more advanced course alongside several experienced shooters, including some off-duty police officers and military veterans. It was an honor she had earned through consistent improvement and dedication, but it also represented a significant step up in difficulty and pressure. Today we're focusing on decision-making under stress, Officer Thompson explained as the group gathered around a table covered with various scenario descriptions. Marksmanship is important, but knowing when to shoot is even more critical. We're going to put you through situations where you'll need to make split-second decisions about threat identification and engagement. The course was designed to simulate real-world encounters where the difference between friend and foe wasn't always immediately obvious. Targets would appear suddenly, some representing threats that needed to be engaged, others representing innocent bystanders who must not be harmed. Participants would have seconds to identify the nature of each target and react appropriately. Sarah felt nervous butterflies in her stomach as she strapped on her equipment. Unlike her usual practice sessions, this exercise would be timed and scored, with her performance compared directly to that of much more experienced shooters. The familiar imposter syndrome she had felt during her first range visit began to creep back in. "Remember," Officer Thompson said quietly as they walked toward the scenario course, "you belong here. You've earned your place through hard work and dedication. Trust your training and don't overthink the decisions." The first participant was a veteran police detective with over 15 years of experience. Sarah watched as he moved through the course with fluid confidence, engaging appropriate targets while safely avoiding non-threatening ones. His movements were economical and precise, each shot deliberate and accurate. His final score was impressive, placing him well within the expert range. Several other participants followed, each demonstrating varying levels of skill and decision-making ability. Some made mistakes, engaging non-threat targets or missing legitimate threats entirely. The course was clearly challenging, designed to push even experienced shooters beyond their comfort zones. When Sarah's turn came, she felt her heart rate increase significantly. The watching group included people whose opinion she respected, and she was acutely aware that she was the least experienced participant by a considerable margin. The men who had mocked her early attempts were not present, but the pressure she felt was no less intense. "Take your time," Officer Thompson advised. "You know the fundamentals, you understand the principles, and you've practiced similar scenarios. Trust your instincts and execute what you've learned." Sarah stepped up to the starting line, her pistol holstered and her hands relaxed at her sides. At the signal, the first scenario began to unfold. A target representing an armed robber appeared from behind cover, clearly displaying a weapon and an aggressive posture. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive, She drew her weapon smoothly, acquired proper sight picture, and placed 2 shots center mass before the target disappeared. The second scenario was more complex. Multiple targets appeared simultaneously, including an armed threat and an unarmed bystander. Sarah's training took over, and she engaged only the legitimate threat while carefully avoiding any shots that might endanger the innocent party. Her decision-making was clean and her execution flawless. As the course progressed, Sarah found herself entering a state of focused calm that she had never experienced before. The nervousness and self-doubt faded away, replaced by the muscle memory and mental conditioning that months of training had developed. Each scenario presented unique challenges, but her responses became increasingly automatic and confident. The most challenging scenario came near the end of the course. Sarah found herself facing a situation where a threat was positioned very close to an innocent person, requiring precise shot placement to neutralize the danger without collateral damage. It was the kind of scenario that tested not just marksmanship skills, but judgment and nerve under extreme pressure. Sarah took a fraction of a second longer than usual to line up her shot, ensuring her sight picture was perfect before pressing the trigger. The shot was placed exactly where she intended, stopping the threat without endangering the bystander. It was the kind of shooting that required both technical skill and complete confidence in one's abilities. When the final scenario concluded, Sarah was breathing hard but exhilarated. She had performed better than she had dared to hope, making clean decisions and accurate shots throughout the entire course. As she holstered her weapon and stepped away from the firing line, she could see approval in the faces of the watching participants. Outstanding performance, Officer Thompson announced as he reviewed Sarah's scorecard. Clean engagement of all legitimate threats, 0 hits on non-combatant targets, and shot placement within scoring zones on every engagement. The final scores were announced to the group, and Sarah was shocked to discover that she had outperformed several participants with years more experience than she possessed. Her score placed her in the advanced category, achievement that seemed impossible just months earlier when she couldn't hit a stationary target at 7 yards. How did she do that? One of the other participants asked Officer Thompson quietly, clearly impressed by Sarah's performance. She's only been shooting for a few months. Natural talent combined with exceptional dedication, Officer Thompson replied. Sarah has put in more practice time than most people do in their first year. She's earned every bit of her skill. After the formal portion of the training concluded, several of the more experienced participants approached Sarah to offer congratulations and discuss her technique. The conversation was respectful and collegial, a far cry from the mockery she had endured during her early attempts at learning. "You've got a real gift for this," commented Detective Rodriguez, who had participated in the advanced course. "Have you given any more thought to our volunteer training programs? We could really use someone with your combination of skill and teaching ability." Sarah was surprised by the suggestion that she possessed teaching ability, but she realized that she had indeed been helping newer shooters during recent range visits. Her own recent experience as a beginner had given her insight into the challenges that novices faced, and she found satisfaction in helping others overcome the same obstacles she had conquered. "I think I'd like that," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "It would be a way to give back to the community while honoring my father's memory." As the group dispersed and equipment was cleaned and stored, Officer Thompson pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. His expression was serious but proud, like a coach whose student had just won an important competition. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," he began. "What you accomplished today isn't just impressive for someone with your level of experience. It's impressive for anyone. You demonstrated decision-making ability and marksmanship skills that many people never develop, regardless of how long they practice." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your father carried a weapon for 25 years in service to his community. He would be incredibly proud to know that his daughter has not only learned to protect herself, but has developed into someone capable of protecting others." The mention of her father brought tears to Sarah's eyes, but they were tears of accomplishment rather than sadness. She thought about the photo she carried in her range bag, about the dreams Miguel had harbored for his daughter's safety and self-reliance. In pursuing those goals, she had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. "There's something else," Officer Thompson continued. "I've been asked to recommend candidates for an advanced instructor certification program. It's normally reserved for people with military or law enforcement backgrounds, but your performance today convinced me that you're ready for that level of training." Sarah was speechless. The transformation from complete novice to instructor candidate seemed impossible, but she realized that every step of the journey had been earned through dedication and hard work. The scared young woman who had first walked into the range was still there, but she was now supported by knowledge, skill, and, most importantly, confidence. "I'd be honored," she finally managed to say. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on how much her relationship with fear had changed. The paralyzing anxiety that had followed her apartment break-in was still present, but it had been transformed into a healthy respect for danger combined with confidence in her ability to respond effectively. She thought about the laughter she had endured during her first attempts at the range, about the men who had dismissed her potential based on gender stereotypes, and her initial inexperience. Their opinion had once seemed so important, so devastating to her self-image. Now their judgment seemed irrelevant, overwhelmed by the evidence of her actual capabilities and the respect she had earned from people whose opinions truly mattered. The skills she had developed were about much more than shooting accuracy. She had learned to remain calm under pressure, to make critical decisions quickly and correctly, and to trust in her own judgment even when facing unfamiliar challenges. These were life skills that extended far beyond the shooting range, affecting her confidence in every aspect of her daily existence. Sarah's journey was far from over. The instructor certification program would present new challenges and opportunities for growth. The volunteer work with Detective Rodriguez would give her chances to help others discover their own capabilities. Most importantly, she had found a way to honor her father's memory while building a future that reflected her own values and strengths. She didn't yet know that all of her training, all of the skills she had developed, and all of the confidence she had built would soon face their ultimate test. The scenarios she had practiced with paper targets and simulated threats were about to become terrifyingly real, and the decisions she had made in training exercises would pale in comparison to the life and death choices that awaited her. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when Sarah's months of training faced its ultimate test. She had just finished her weekly grocery shopping and was loading bags in her car in the parking lot of the community center where she had recently begun volunteering with Detective Rodriguez's youth mentoring program. The autumn air was crisp, and the parking lot was well lit, giving her no reason to feel concerned about her safety. Sarah had been working with a group of teenagers for the past month, teaching them firearm safety and decision-making principles as part of the broader community outreach program. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, who had been such a novice just months earlier, was now helping others develop the same skills that had transformed her own life. Tonight's session had gone particularly well. The teenagers were responding positively to her teaching style, which emphasized patience and encouragement over criticism. Sarah had discovered that her own recent experience as a struggling beginner gave her unique insight into the challenges that new shooters faced. "You make it look so easy," one of the teenagers, Marcus, had told her after successfully hitting his target for the first time. "But you explain it in a way that actually makes sense." Sarah had smiled at the compliment, remembering how overwhelming the learning process had felt during her own early attempts. Her teaching philosophy was simple. Everyone deserved to learn at their own pace without judgment or mockery. The contrast to her own initial experience couldn't have been more stark. As she closed her car trunk and reached for her keys, Sarah became aware of raised voices coming from the far end of the parking lot. The community center was located in a generally safe neighborhood, but she had learned to pay attention to her surroundings in ways she never had before her training began. 3 figures were gathered around a car near the building's entrance, and their body language suggested an argument rather than a friendly conversation. Sarah's training had taught her to assess potential threats from a distance, and something about the situation made her uncomfortable. She paused, key halfway to her car door, and observed the scene more carefully. 2 of the figures appeared to be teenagers, while the third was an adult man she didn't recognize. As she watched, the argument seemed to escalate, with the adult becoming increasingly animated and aggressive. Sarah recognized one of the teenagers as Marcus, the young man from her training group who had just achieved his first successful target hits earlier that evening. The other teenager appeared to be a girl roughly the same age, though Sarah couldn't see her clearly from this distance. The situation looked increasingly concerning, but Sarah's first instinct was to avoid getting involved. She had no way of knowing what the argument was about, and intervening in disputes between strangers was generally inadvisable. Her training had emphasized the importance of avoiding confrontation whenever possible. However, as she watched, the adult man's posture became more threatening. He moved closer to the teenagers, and Sarah could see him gesturing aggressively. The girl appeared to be trying to back away, while Marcus seemed to be attempting to place himself between her and the adult. Sarah's training had included scenarios involving the protection of others, particularly situations where innocent people were threatened by aggressive individuals. Officer Thompson had emphasized that the decision to intervene was always personal, but that those with the skills and ability to help others had a moral obligation to consider action when someone was clearly in danger. The adult man suddenly reached out and grabbed the girl by the arm, causing her to cry out in distress. Marcus immediately stepped forward, and Sarah could see him trying to pull the man's hand away from the girl. The situation had clearly moved beyond a simple argument into the realm of physical assault. Sarah made her decision quickly. She retrieved her cell phone and dialed 911 while moving closer to the confrontation, staying alert for any signs that the situation might escalate further. Her concealed carry permit and months of training meant that she was prepared for various scenarios, but she hoped that the arrival of law enforcement would resolve the situation peacefully. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered. I'm at the community center on Oak Street, and there's a physical altercation in the parking lot, Sarah reported, continuing to move closer while maintaining a safe distance. An adult male is physically restraining a teenage girl against her will, and another teenager is trying to intervene. Officers are being dispatched, the dispatcher replied. Can you stay on the line and provide updates on the situation? As Sarah watched, the confrontation continued to escalate. The adult man released his grip on the girl, but then turned aggressively toward Marcus, shoving him backward with considerable force. The teenager stumbled and nearly fell, and Sarah could see that the size difference between him and the adult was significant. The adult male has now become physically aggressive with both teenagers, Sarah reported to the dispatcher. This appears to be an assault in progress. What happened next changed everything. The adult man reached into his jacket and withdrew what Sarah immediately recognized as a handgun. Her training had taught her to identify threats quickly and accurately, and there was no mistaking the weapon's outline or the man's aggressive intentions. He's armed, Sarah told the dispatcher urgently. The suspect has drawn a weapon and is threatening the teenagers. The man was now pointing the gun directly at Marcus while shouting something Sarah couldn't clearly hear from her position. The girl was screaming, and Marcus had his hands raised in a defensive posture. The situation had moved from assault to life-threatening in a matter of seconds. Sarah's mind raced through the decision-making protocols she had practiced countless times during her training. The presence of a firearm pointed at innocent people created an immediate threat to life. The teenagers were trapped against their car with no avenue of escape, and police response time was uncertain. Every principal Officer Thompson had taught her came flooding back, assess the threat, consider alternatives, make a decision, and act decisively if action is warranted. The threat was clear and immediate. The alternatives were limited given the teenagers' trapped position. The decision was agonizing, but necessary. Sarah moved to a position behind a parked vehicle that would provide her with cover while giving her a clear line of sight to the armed man. Her own weapon remained holstered, but her hand moved to the grip as she continued to assess the developing situation. "Drop the weapon," she heard the man yell at Marcus. "Get on the ground now, or I'll shoot you both." The demand confirmed Sarah's assessment that this was not a simple robbery or domestic dispute. The man's behavior suggested either severe mental instability or involvement in some other criminal activity that had somehow drawn in two innocent teenagers. Marcus remained standing with his hands raised, clearly trying to protect the girl while avoiding any movements that might trigger violence. Sarah could see the terror in both teenagers' faces, and she realized that police response time might not be fast enough to prevent tragedy. The suspect is making verbal threats and demanding the teenagers get on the ground, Sarah reported to the dispatcher while moving to a better tactical position. "I believe he intends to harm them." The man's agitation was increasing, and Sarah could see his grip tighten on the weapon. Every indication suggested that he was preparing to follow through on his threats. The teenagers were clearly terrified and had no means of escape or defense. Sarah made the most difficult decision of her life. She drew her own weapon, using the cover of the parked car to conceal her movement, and called out in a clear, firm voice. "Police are on the way. Drop your weapon and step away from the children." The man spun toward the sound of her voice, his weapon moving away from the teenagers, but now searching for this new threat. Sarah maintained her position behind cover, weapon ready, but not yet aimed, hoping that the knowledge of incoming police response might convince him to surrender. "I said drop the weapon," she repeated, this time with more authority in her voice. "You're surrounded and police are en route." The bluff about being surrounded was a calculated risk, but Sarah hoped it might create enough doubt in the man's mind to prevent immediate violence. She could see him looking around frantically, trying to locate her position while keeping his weapon generally pointed in her direction. "Marcus, get the girl behind the car." Sarah shouted to the teenagers. "Stay low and keep moving." The teenagers didn't need to be told twice. They immediately dropped low and began moving toward the cover of their vehicle, putting solid metal between themselves and the armed man. Their movement seemed to further agitate the suspect, who began moving in their direction while maintaining his weapon in a threatening position. Sarah realized that her attempt at de-escalation had failed, and that the man appeared determined to harm the teenagers regardless of consequences. She moved to a shooting position, acquiring a sight picture on the suspect, while hoping desperately that he would surrender before she was forced to fire. The situation reached its climax when the man rounded the car where the teenagers were hiding and raised his weapon toward them with clear intent to fire. Sarah had trained for exactly this scenario dozens of times, but the reality was more intense and terrifying than any simulation could have prepared her for. Time seemed to slow as Sarah made the final decision her training had prepared her for. She had a clear shot. The threat was immediate and deadly, and innocent lives were in imminent danger. Every principle of defensive shooting that Officer Thompson had taught her came into focus in that crucial moment. Sarah fired twice, center mass, just as she had been trained. The shots were accurate and effective, stopping the threat immediately and permanently. The man collapsed to the ground, his weapon falling harmlessly beside him. In the sudden silence that followed, Sarah could hear sirens approaching in the distance. The teenagers were safe, cowering behind their car, but unharmed. The armed threat had been neutralized, but Sarah was shaking as the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. She had trained for this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional impact of actually using deadly force to protect innocent lives. The technical aspects of the shooting had been executed flawlessly, but the human cost was overwhelming. The police sirens grew louder as Sarah stood behind the parked car, her weapon now lowered but still in her hands. The armed threat was down, motionless on the asphalt, and the two teenagers were safe but clearly traumatized by what they had just witnessed. The next few minutes would be critical, as responding officers would arrive to find an active scene with multiple people present and weapons involved. Sarah's training had covered post-shooting procedures extensively, but experiencing it in reality was entirely different from classroom discussions. She carefully placed her weapon on the ground and stepped away from it, raising her hands to show she was no longer armed. The last thing she wanted was for responding officers to mistake her for the original threat. "Marcus, are you and your friend okay?" she called out to the teenagers, who were still crouched behind their car. "We're okay," Marcus replied, his voice shaky but clear. "Sarah, is it you? What just happened?" Before Sarah could respond, 3 patrol cars came screaming into the parking lot with lights flashing and sirens blaring. Officers emerged quickly, weapons drawn, shouting commands for everyone to show their hands and get on the ground. Sarah immediately complied, dropping to her knees with her hands raised high above her head. "I'm the one who called 911, she shouted. "My weapon is on the ground behind the blue sedan. I'm unarmed now." The scene was chaotic as officers moved to secure the area, check on the downed suspect, and separate the various people present for individual questioning. Sarah found herself face down on the concrete with her hands zip-tied behind her back, which she knew was standard procedure for officer safety until the situation could be fully sorted out. "Are you injured?" one of the officers asked as he secured Sarah. "No, I'm not hurt," she replied. "The 2 teenagers behind the car are also uninjured. The suspect threatened them with a firearm, and I was forced to stop the threat." Sarah could hear other officers calling for medical assistance, though she suspected it would be too late for the armed man. Her training had taught her to shoot to stop the threat, and she had done exactly that. The reality of taking a human life, even in defense of innocence, was something no amount of preparation could truly prepare someone for. Detective Rodriguez arrived on scene within minutes, having heard the call on a radio and recognized the location as the community center where Sarah volunteered. She immediately took charge of the investigation, ensuring that Sarah was treated appropriately as both a witness and a potential defendant in what would inevitably become a complex legal case. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully," Detective Rodriguez said as she knelt beside her. "Don't say anything else about what happened until you have legal representation present. This is for your own protection, not because you did anything wrong." The advice was sound, and Sarah nodded her understanding. She had read extensively about the legal aftermath of defensive shootings, and she knew that even justified uses of force could result in lengthy legal proceedings. Officer Thompson arrived shortly after Detective Rodriguez, having also heard the radio traffic and recognizing Sarah's name. His presence was immediately reassuring, representing both her training and the professional relationships she had built within the law enforcement community. "Tom, thank God you're here," Detective Rodriguez said quietly. "Sarah was forced to stop an armed threat to those teenagers. From what I can see, everything was done by the book, but this is going to be a long night." Officer Thompson looked at Sarah with a mixture of pride and concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. "I did what you taught me," Sarah replied simply. "I tried to de-escalate. I took cover. I warned him multiple times, and I only fired when he was about to shoot those kids." "That's exactly what you were supposed to do," Officer Thompson confirmed. "You saved 2 lives tonight, Sarah. Don't ever forget that." The crime scene investigation took several hours to complete. Sarah was eventually released from the zip ties and allowed to sit in a patrol car while detectives documented the scene and collected evidence. Her weapon was taken as evidence, which was standard procedure, and she was informed that she would need to provide a detailed statement once her attorney was present. Marcus and the girl, whose name was Jennifer, were also questioned extensively. Their statements corroborated Sarah's account completely, describing how the armed man had approached them aggressively, physically assaulted Jennifer, and threatened both of them with death before Sarah intervened. "She saved our lives," Marcus told the detectives. "That man was going to kill us. I could see it in his eyes. If Sarah hadn't been there." Jennifer was more shaken, but equally clear in her account. "He grabbed me and said he was going to make me pay for something my brother supposedly did. I don't even know what he was talking about. Then he pulled out that gun and started threatening Marcus too." As the investigation continued, the identity of the armed man was established through his identification. He turned out to be a known criminal with an extensive record of violence and drug-related offenses. The teenagers had apparently been targeted due to a case of mistaken identity related to Jennifer's brother, who had witnessed a crime several months earlier and was scheduled to testify in an upcoming trial. This was likely an intimidation attack that went wrong, Detective Rodriguez explained to the assembled investigators. The suspect probably intended to threaten the girl to prevent her brother's testimony, but the situation escalated when the boy tried to protect her. The legal resolution of the case took several weeks, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Security cameras from the community center had captured portions of the incident, clearly showing the armed man's aggressive behavior and threats toward the teenagers. Sarah's actions were ruled completely justified, and no charges were filed against her. The psychological aftermath was more challenging than the legal proceedings. Sarah found herself experiencing a range of emotions she hadn't expected, from relief that the teenagers were safe to guilt over taking a human life, even one that had posed a deadly threat to innocence. Officer Thompson arranged for Sarah to speak with a counselor who specialized in post-shooting trauma for law enforcement officers. Even when you do everything right, even when lives are saved, taking a human life leaves its mark, he explained. Getting professional help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. The counseling sessions helped Sarah process what had happened and come to terms with the reality that she had been forced to make an impossible choice in an impossible situation. She learned that the emotional impact of justified shootings was normal and that her feelings of guilt and sadness didn't diminish the righteousness of her actions. 6 weeks after the shooting, Sarah returned to the range for the first time. Officer Thompson was waiting for her, along with Detective Rodriguez and several other members of the law enforcement community who had supported her through the aftermath of the incident. I wasn't sure I'd ever want to shoot again, Sarah admitted as she handled her new pistol, a replacement for the one still held in evidence. But I realized that what happened proved the value of all this training. Those kids are alive because I was prepared. Her first shots were tentative, but her muscle memory quickly reasserted itself. The fundamentals that Officer Thompson had drilled into her remained solid, and her accuracy was as good as it had ever been. More importantly, her confidence in her abilities was intact. I have something for you, Officer Thompson said, producing a small wooden plaque. On it was mounted a picture of Sarah with Marcus and Jennifer, taken at a community appreciation ceremony the week before. Below the picture were the words, "Courage under fire when training saves lives." "This goes in our wall of honor," he explained, right next to the recognition plaques for police officers and military personnel who have distinguished themselves in the line of duty. Sarah looked at the plaque with tears in her eyes. The journey from complete novice to honored defender seemed impossible, but every step had been earned through dedication and perseverance. The men who had mocked her early attempts now seemed like figures from a different lifetime, their laughter irrelevant compared to the lives she had saved. "There's something else," Detective Rodriguez added. "The community center has asked if you'd be willing to expand your volunteer role. They want you to develop a comprehensive self-defense and situational awareness program for teenagers and young adults." The offer represented a chance to turn her traumatic experience into something positive that could help others avoid similar dangers. Sarah realized that this was how she could honor both her father's memory and the opportunity she had been given to make a difference. "I'd like to do that," she said firmly, "but I want to make sure we teach more than just shooting. I want to teach them how to avoid dangerous situations, how to de-escalate conflicts, and how to make good decisions under pressure." Officer Thompson nodded approvingly. "Your father would be proud. You've taken the skills he wanted you to learn and used them not just to protect yourself, but to protect others and teach the next generation." As Sarah left the range that day, she reflected on the complete transformation her life had undergone. The scared, helpless victim who had first walked through those doors no longer existed. In her place stood a confident, capable woman who had faced the ultimate test and emerged stronger. The laughter that had once seemed so devastating now felt like motivation. Every person who had doubted her abilities, who had assumed she couldn't learn or grow or rise to meet challenges, had been proven wrong by her actions when it mattered most. Sarah had discovered that true strength wasn't about never being afraid or never facing setbacks. It was about persevering despite fear, learning from failures, and being ready when others needed you most. The skills she had developed through months of training had saved 2 young lives, but more importantly, they had revealed capabilities within herself that she never knew existed. The wall behind the targets, the one where her first wild shots had struck harmlessly, now seemed like a metaphor for her journey. What had once represented failure and embarrassment had become the foundation for growth and eventual triumph. Sometimes the most important lessons came not from immediate success, but from the determination to continue after missing the mark. Marcus and Jennifer visited her at the range regularly now, both having decided to learn the same skills that had saved their lives. Sarah found deep satisfaction in teaching them, passing on not just technical knowledge, but the confidence and mindset that could help them protect themselves and others. "You know," Marcus told her during one of their sessions, "I used to think guns were just for police and soldiers. But you show me that regular people can learn to be heroes when they need to be." Sarah smiled at the compliment, but corrected him gently. "I'm not a hero, Marcus. I'm just someone who was prepared when preparation mattered. That's what we're teaching you to be: prepared, responsible, and ready to make good decisions under pressure." The transformation was complete, but the journey continued. Every day brought new opportunities to grow, to learn, and to help others discover their own potential. The scared young woman who had once missed a target at 7 yards had become someone who could be counted on when lives hung in the balance. And in the quiet moments when she cleaned her weapon or practiced her fundamentals, Sarah could almost hear her father's voice expressing the pride she knew he would feel. She had taken his lessons about protection and responsibility and turned them into something greater, a commitment to serving others and making her community safer. The laughter had stopped long ago, replaced by the silence of respect and recognition. When Officer Thompson had said, Check the back wall. He might have been referring to those early missed shots, but Sarah knew the real meaning was deeper. The back wall represented the foundation of her journey, the place where failure had been transformed into determination, and where a frightened novice had begun her evolution into a guardian of others.